So I have Bill here with Flat Branch Home Loans, and he's been following my dyslexia posts and stuff and let me know that he was actually dyslexic too, which I thought was awesome. I love to find other people that have been successful in other areas, and it seems like in the real estate business, there is a lot of dyslexic people that I've found over the last few weeks. It's kind of cool. So I just thought I would have Bill come and kind of share his story just a tiny bit so everybody can hear about it.
I appreciate it, and it's crazy because I started following your posts. It's ridiculously underappreciated. It's just one of those things where not a lot of folks talk about it. But so I actually didn't know about dyslexia. I had no clue. Everybody thinks it's you're reading words backwards or whatever the case it is, but was listening to an audiobook, and that is a cue right there where, wasn't reading a book, but listening to an audiobook. And it was Malcolm Gladwell's, and like I said, it's Outliers or David and Goliath or one of those two. But it focused on folks who had a specific sort of what they would consider to be a disability of some kind, right? Where people would look at that and say, okay, well, they have this sort of issue, but it caused these people to think outside the box and kind of go around, instead of being able to go straight through, they have to go around to find a different solution to the problem. And they talked about all these different people who were incredibly instrumental throughout history, and realistically just talking about what were some of the practical challenges that they had. And the more I listened, the more I was, my gosh, this is all too familiar, some of these things. And so I remember mowing my back lawn and getting so focused on this interview and hearing all these things that I completely botched my backyard. It was horrible. It was the worst mow job that I've ever done ever. And so I walked into the house and I talked to my wife. I said, I think I'm dyslexic. And she goes, no, you're not. I'm like, I think I am. So I reached out to a friend of mine who's a clinical psychologist and that I actually went to high school with. And I said, hey, I really want to get, come in to see you and test this. And her response was, oh yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. I knew you in high school. But she didn't want to be the one to see me because she kind of had a little bit of bias there. And she had one of her business partners, and it was several hours of testing and interviewing and just kind of, and it was a little crazy because they give you this pseudo word test where they're not real words, but they're B's and P's and Q's and D's and stuff like that, and they flip them, and it's about 100 words that you have to read, and after you get done, they sort of evaluate whether or not you have dyslexia based on what you've read. And it was interesting because when I did the test, she came back kind of with the results and said, you've got me stumped. And I'm like, oh no. The person with 25 years of experience, I just feel like, how broken am I? And so we talked about it. So she said the first 20 to 25 words you botched, and I said, yeah, he absolutely has dyslexia. And she goes, and then the next 75 words you nailed. She goes, so I don't know if there's something in your brain that is, once it starts adapting and starts reading that you just start picking it up and then your brain fixes it. She goes, but it makes sense. And she started telling me about some of the other test results that I had. And so she goes, so I can't definitively tell you that as far as like an official diagnosis that you have dyslexia, but I think you have dyslexia. So it was interesting because apparently, I don't want to get in realms that I don't know what I'm talking about, but apparently it just has to do with the fact that they do consider it a disability. They do consider it something that you can then go in and maybe claim disability from the government. So they want to be careful about certain things. But regardless of all that, it was very, I broke down. Like, it was incredibly emotional for me to have that sort of affirmation and confirmation of all the struggles that I had in high school and junior high, and I tried to go to college and failed out, and I tried to go back to college again and failed out, and the second time was online college and just online classes, and it was miserable trying to, because all it is reading.
Yeah,
there's no lectures.
No way. Yeah.
And so just to be able to have someone affirm to say, hey, this is why, it was, oh gosh, I'm not broken. Like I'm not lazy. this thing.
Awesome. I mean, I can relate to that with my youngest son in that, you know, I think it was a relief for him to find out that he was dyslexic because he was working so hard and we were just like, what is wrong with him? You know, I just don't get it. And like, I would tell my friends about it and they'd be like, it doesn't make any sense because if you talk to him, you're like, oh my goodness, like the things he talks about is way above like the age that he was. Like he was very intelligent and you're like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why is this? And, you know, as I've been learning, there's definitely different levels of it. Like there's severity, like you're mild and then there's severe. My youngest son has been diagnosed as severe. And so it's definitely very hard for him. But through this process, I even found out my middle son has some dyslexia tendencies and now he's getting help and it's helped him as well. So, and I feel like you probably would have shown more signs if you were tested when you were younger.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But you've learned how to adapt, which is basically what, you know, if you do get diagnosed when you're younger, you learn how to adapt and they can teach you more so that you can, and you can also get help in school if they know how to help you. Because like everything they were doing for my son, they weren't helping him because it wasn't what he needed. And now, you know, he gets his tests read to him so that, you know, and then he can ace them. You know, so how simple is that you couldn't just have your tests read to you? Probably would have done a million times better.
Right.
But when you're reading them, it's so much harder.
When I discovered Audible and audiobooks, I used to tell people how I can't stand reading. I hate reading. I hate reading so much. And then, you know, podcasts when they started coming about and being long form, and then audiobooks, I would consume so much content listening. I mean, anytime that I mowed the lawn, anytime that I was doing anything that was kind of mindless that I can, I was listening to whatever I could. I loved learning this stuff. I just didn't like learning it with having to sit down and read a book in front of me.
For sure.
I can remember the frustration of reading through the same page 5-6 times and just being so frustrated with myself going, I don't understand why I'm not absorbing any of this. I can't understand what this is saying, and I know how to read. And so I would go through and I'd read it out loud, and that would help sometimes. But even then, I would find myself getting in the middle of it going, okay, I'm reading the words out loud, but I'm not, it can...
well, I mean, your brain is working so hard to read the words that then you're not comprehending what you're actually reading. I mean, audiobooks are our favorite at our house. My son, he loves audiobooks, and it's so exciting to me to see that he finally can love books, because like when they're young, they always tell you, read to your kids, so they'll make them good readers. And I was like, I read to my kids every single day since he was like, you know, 2 days old, and I'm like, he's not a good reader. What's wrong with him? You know, so it's not true. I mean, it's good to read to your kids, but you know,
still do that. Good practice.
But once we found audiobooks, like we have this learning alley that we found, and it's really awesome for kids. It has like a bunch of kids books and stuff. Super awesome. So we use that a lot. And it's so fun to see now my kids love reading again, even though they're not physically reading it.
But they're getting the content, learning, and honestly, so YouTube is one of those things where, I mean, that's been instrumental for me, and there's so much great content. I can sit down, I can listen to a 3-hour lecture. And I can learn from that. But I mean, and honestly, what's crazy, same thing is audiobooks. I mean, especially when they're written by the author, narrated by the author. It's, you kind of get the way that they intended it to be consumed. And so it's one of those things where hearing them, it's like you're just listening to a lecture is what you're doing. Listening to them tell their story, and I can absorb that. I can learn from that. I can remember that. Reading a book, not a chance. So YouTube, same thing, watching someone do a lecture, getting to see like the visualization part was huge for me as well. Just getting to see someone lecture or getting to see someone debates. I love listening to debates. Same thing, learn a ton. But if I'm reading a manuscript or something, no.
For sure. Well, I thank you for sharing your story. I love it. It's always, I just want to get the word out there that, you know, they call it a disability, but in my opinion, it's not a disability. Like you just think differently, and sometimes people that are dyslexic can do amazing things. And I mean, you can go on, and I just want kids that now to get help because there's so many kids that don't get help and they think that they're awful. They fail out of, college or even high school, just barely, basically they just pass them through. I think a lot of these kids just get passed on, like we're just going to pass them to get them out of here because they're a headache or whatever. And what if they would have been found out that they were dyslexic and they just needed to help them a little bit differently?
Right.
Like how many more people could we help?
And the awareness part of that is so crucial because we've all got friends that are educators. We've got friends that are, and they're working in a system that they don't have any control over. But it's one of those things where when you have, however many students in there that need that different sort of learning, it's very difficult. I mean, I couldn't be a public educator, but just thinking about that, that would be difficult because how do you keep everyone else on track but also do that? So there are additional awareness that needs to be made, which that's why I appreciate your content so much, because the awareness is clutch. And then helping whatever we got to do to be able to help students, to help children to figure out how to adapt. I don't know how it happened with me. I was fortunate, but I can imagine,
Well, and I said, I think it depends on your severity. And
Yeah.
I don't think you were as severe, so you could still somewhat get through. But then some kids are very severe and there's no way. And those kids are the ones that get shoved in the special education classes and they just feel worthless.
Yeah.
And it's so awful if they just get the tutoring and the help that they need, they can excel. Because my son now, I mean, he's only in 3rd grade now, but it's amazing the amount of help. I mean, I of course had to find all this out through COVID and it was very, very frustrating. They threw him in a special education class, which is not where he needed to be. And I would tell my friends and they were just like, it doesn't even make any sense why he would be there. If you talk to him, like it was so frustrating.
If I had to go through high school in COVID, I would still be in high school.
Yeah.
It's just, there's no chance I would have
Well,
passed
and then it makes me wonder, like all the kids that drop out, how many of those are dyslexic?
Yeah.
Because they just got frustrated and nobody was helping them. And a lot of times kids act out because they don't know what else to do.
Right.
So my goal is to just make kids that are, help kids find out that they are dyslexic and that it's not, I mean, they call it a disability, but it's not. You just have to use it.
It's a different way of solving a problem.
Yeah. And use your brain for, a different way, and you can change the world a different way.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to call it, but I don't like that it's called a disability.
I have an appreciation for the word. It does seem to come off a little odd. It certainly isn't something like if you were missing an arm, that's a disability where I can't use my right arm.
For sure.
That's not there. So I sort of understand it from that perspective of, okay, well, I don't read like anyone else, but I understand it there. But it does, people who don't have the right arm are probably way better at using their left hand than most people on the planet.
For sure.
So it's it's one of those things where you're learning to adapt.
You learn to adapt to it, and it's the same thing with dyslexia. You just learn to adapt.
Yep.
So maybe you listen to audiobooks instead of you read your textbook or whatever,
And people with dyslexia are very commonly they're problem solvers. They love solving problems.
For sure. And they're good at it. Way better than the average person is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for sharing. I love it.
Yeah, thank you.